Hello everyone, my name is KP and it's my very first video on this channel. So in this channel, we are going to cover how to create different workflows for AI automation that can be used in your day-to-day tasks using n8n. So today's video, we are going to talk about how to create a workflow for creating a Google Forms survey and collecting responses from that Google Forms survey using a large language model or an agent to create a survey for you. As you've noticed, in n8n, basically, if you search for Google Form node, there is basically no way for you to create a Google Form directly from n8n. So that's what we are going to cover today. So let's start with basically adding a trigger node to our workflow. So I'm not going to use trigger manually. I'm not going to connect to a chat either. So instead, I'm going to use when I skip another workflow. It is because we want to use the test data directly from this. So I'm going to use when I skip another workflow. And also the use case of this workflow is that it should be connected to a different workflow. For example, you have an agent that takes a message or query from the user, then it's going to pass the query or the message from the user to this workflow. So that's why we're going to use when executable and another workflow. Right. So how do we create the Google Form when it's not available in n8n? So we're going to use Google Forms API, which is available on the Google's documentation. So here it is. I'm going to show you. This is the Google Forms documentation. Basically, you can go to Google and then you can search for Google Forms API documentation. And this is basically what shows you. So in this API, what do we have? If you go to V1 Forms, then we can have overview, see what this API is about. Let me just hide this one. Right. Okay. So in this video, as you can see, in this page, as you can see, there are multiple basically explanations on how to use JSON representation, JSON body to send data to Google Forms API in order to create a form. And we have the batch update, which is another method for basically updating the form fields. I'm going to explain this later on. And we can create a form. This is where we are going to create a form. And then we have get in order to get a particular form that has been created using the form ID. Okay, so let's not go through all of these in details. So let's start with how we can actually ask the agent to create a form for us. Okay, so we are going to connect to this workflow an AI agent. So we go here, we say AI agent. So we want this agent to create a form with all the data that can be sent to Google Forms API from a prompt. Okay, so this is the prompt that I'm going to use in this agent. It's going to be a very long prompt, but I'm going to provide you with the example in the chat. So I'm going to add a system message here, and let's switch to expression so we can see the whole prompt. Okay, so as you can see here, I asked the agent that it's going to be an expert Google Forms creator, and then it's going to accept a query from the user. So, and the query can be very vague. For example, create a survey for XYZ. So in that query, there's basically no target audience, no particular questions to be asked. So the agent will need to basically rely on its expertise in order to create the questions and the responses that basically match the context of the query. So that's what I want the agent to be able to do. And then we need to provide the agent with a particular example of the output. So what is this output? It's basically a JSON object that can be used in the request that we make to the Google Forms API, and it's going to be a JSON object. So in this JSON object, what do I want to have? I want to have the title, I want to have the description. The title is basically the title of the form. Description is the description of the form. I will show you where the description and title can be displayed in the form later on as well. And we have this basically request. This is an object that can be put into the form. And then we have having multiple items here, and then what we're going to do next is we want to connect the AI agent to a chat model. So in this case, I'm going to use OpenAI. And in this OpenAI chat model, I've experienced multiple times. And basically, when I use GPT 4.1 mini or GPT 4.1, I always got the wrong output. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to explain to you what happened with my experimentations later on as well. So we are going to use a model of O4 mini here. I'm looking for O4 mini. So we have O4 mini here, and this is the model we're going to use. And then, honestly, we can't trust the agent in producing a very long JSON object like this because of the hallucinations from OpenAI GPT. So we want to pass the output into a JSON object. The reason we do that is because Google Forms API accepts only a particular JSON structure, and if we pass in the fields that are not identified by the API, then we're going to get an error. So we are going to turn on this require specific output format, and by doing this, we can have this output parser, which I'm going to connect to structured output parser. And the structured output parser I'm going to use basically matches what Google identifies here in the batch update method. So as you can see in the batch update, we are required to have all of these. We have we are required to have this request object. So as you can see in this request object, we have multiple objects here, and these are the compulsory objects. Not actually compulsory for all of them, but some of them are optional. For example, move item, delete item, update are optional. Okay, so what do we want to the agent to be producing? So in the structured output format or parser, I'm going to select generate or defined using a JSON schema. So I'm going to paste in this schema. As you can see, this is a very long schema that matches exactly what Google wants here. Okay, so now we have an agent that can basically identify the query to create a form, and then create the output that can be passed into a JSON object and be used later on for Google Forms API. And then let's test out. I'm going to go to this node. I'm going to set a test data. So I'm going to define using a JSON field below, add field. I'm going to add query here. That is a string. So the query is basically any query from the user. And then I'm going to set a data. This is a test data. So I'm going to put in here query, and I'm going to delete this one. And this query, for example, I will say create a survey for a movie night, for example. So in here, basically there's no context, there's no target audience. And let's see if our agent can create the questions and answers corresponding to this query. Okay, and then we forgot to add in something here, that is the prompt from the user. So I'm going to just put in JSON.query. That is the query from the previous node. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and I'm going to execute this workflow, and let's see what's going to happen. Okay, our workflow has been executed successfully. So let's see what we have here. So we have the output, and we have, you see, the title, which is the movie night survey. We have description for this survey, and this is the request object we have. We have update form info. We have create item. So create item is basically for creating a question together with the question type, or either text or radio button or so on. And we have multiple questions here. How many questions we have? We have 7 questions in total, because index here identify the position of the question in the form. So we have about 7. We have 7 questions here. Okay, that's good. Right. So this is the output. Okay. So we have 7 questions. So let's go back to the issue I had previously with the OpenAI chat model. So we were using O4 Mini. So let's say if I switch to GPT 4.1 and run the query again to see what happens. And as you can see, first of all, our GPT 4.1 outputs something that cannot be parsed by the structured output parser. So let's try again to see if it can produce something that can be parsed into a JSON object. Again, it cannot complete the query. Okay, so I tried again and again with different prompts and different restrictions to the prompt JSON format, but it couldn't even just parse into a JSON parser. So I'm going to change the model again to O4 Mini, and then just to ensure that we didn't have any coincidence in running the model. So let's execute again with O4 Mini. Okay, so our O4 Mini model has completed the workflow, and the structured output parser is pleased with the results. Okay, so let's try again. Now we have the request here. We have how many questions we have? We have around 9 questions. Index 8 means that's the 9th position in the list. Okay, that's great. That's great. So now we need to we have a Google form. We have the data to be used in the Google form. So let's just pin this data so we can use it later on. And then we need to have a spreadsheet to capture the responses, right? So let's say, first of all, I will create a spreadsheet, and we're going to use this node to create the spreadsheet. So what do we have in this node? So we have so first of all, in order to create a spreadsheet, which you can basically type in here, a Google Sheets. This node I copied from the other workflow of mine. So you can create a spreadsheet here. You click on this node, and then data in this node would be, first of all, you connect to your credential, which I did here already. So basically you need to go through the setup on your Google Cloud console. Everything there, and then we're going to use the title of the spreadsheet. So the title of the spreadsheet, I'm going to use the exact same title as produced by our agent. So it's going to be from the output title, or output.title. So what we're going to do next is we are going to have a convenient node in order to set the data so we can reuse later on. So I'm going to have the set form field nodes. What do we have in here? So we have the title, the description, and the form fields. So the title is basically come from our agent's output.title, and description, and which is the description form, and it's coming from our agent's output.description. And the form fields here, as I mentioned previously, so the form fields are basically coming from the request object in the Google Forms API, which are these objects. So the form fields there are basically coming from our agents.output.request, and this is an object, as you can see here. So this is an object. It contains mostly everything here. Okay, great. So we have this node in order to reuse all of these fields later on, so we don't have to refer to this AI agent node. So the next step we're going to do is we are going to create the form. And in order to create the form, this is a node from the other workflow of mine. So we are going to send a post request, because in order to create a form, if you go to this page, and you can see this is a post request. And in order to create this, we are going to call the HTTP request node in NHN. So this is the HTTP request. So this is exactly as this one. So I'm going to keep this one. And then what do I have in this HTTP request node? So first of all, I need to select the post method, and then the URL, that is the URL from this page, HTTPS and v1 forms. So I'm going to use it here, and I'm going to use the predefined credential type because previously I used the create spreadsheet here and I connect it to my Google Drive credential, so I can use a predefined credential type here, and then that's going to be Thrive OAuth 2 API. Right, and then we're going to toggle the send body on. And what do we have in this body? So we have in this body is a JSON object. And Google Form, in order to create a Google Form, you can see we can have a request body, which is an instance of a form. And this is the info of the form. And if you read the description here, the form ID, we don't have the form ID when we create a form, so we can omit that one. So we have the info here, which is the object we need to set. So that's what we are going to do here. So let's go back to this create form HTTP request. So this is an this is JSON object, and it has one object here, which is the info. And within this info object, we have the title, and the title is coming from our set form field node previously, and that is the title. And we have the document title, which has the same title as well. The reason we don't set other form fields is because when we create a form, Google Forms API only allows us to create the title and maximum the document title. So it doesn't allow us to create all the form fields at the time of sending the request to create a form. So we first need to create a form first. So I'm going to connect this node here. Okay. And then, so let's first create a spreadsheet to see what's going on. As you can see, our spreadsheet is titled Movie Night Survey. So let's execute this. So when we execute this node, we can have a spreadsheet showed in my Thrive, which is Movie Night Survey here. And then we are going to set the form fields here. As you can see, we have the form fields set. And as you can see in my Thrive here, I don't have any form for Movie Night Survey. So I'm going to send this post request in order to create this form. So I'm going to execute this one. And as you can see, it says our form has been created. So I'm going to pin this one because we're going to use it later on. So we need to take note of the form ID and the form fields, the spreadsheet ID as well. So we're going to pin this node. Okay. Right, so now we have the form. As you can see here, we have a Movie Night Survey. So let's see what our form looks like. So you can see we have the title here, and we don't have the description yet because, as I said previously, it only accepts the title for the form at the creation. Okay, so at least now we have the form created. So how about the questions and other information? So we are going to use a different HTTP request, and this time it's going to use the batch update request here. So what do we have in this batch update request? It's going to be a post request, and then it's going to point to batch update, and it's going to be using our form ID. Okay, so I have this node here, which is also an HTTP request node. So we're going to send to the URL, as you can see, this exact URL with the form ID. So we are going to go back here, and then we have the exact URL forms, and we're going to use the form ID from our previous node, which is create form, and this item.json, the form ID. I'm going to use :batch update. Okay, now we have the URL. So what is the data to send? So first of all, I'm going to toggle on the send body here, and then the body content type is going to be a JSON object, and I'm going to use JSON in order to pass in the data body, the body data. And what do we have in here? So we have one JSON object that is a request object. It has to be written in this way, all lowercase letters and with the S in the request, and then colon. So this is the form fields that we set in our convenient node, that is set form fields here. As you can see, the requests produced by our agent with all the questions and answers, and we are going to use that to send to the batch update API. So let me connect this node to our workflow and let's execute it. Okay, now so the request has gone through, which means our agent has successfully produced all the fields for the questions that Google API requests. So the node has successfully executed. So let's check again in our form to see if we have the questions. Right, so now you can see we have the title here, we have the description of the form together with some other questions. We have what is your name, the first question is a text, and how many people. You can see it's radio button for you to choose from a number, and it has a drop down as well here, if I may say. Yes, it's a drop down, and then it has tick boxes as well here, and then a free text. We have the poll here, which is also radio button radio button here, and that's it. So now we have a simple form with all the questions we want. Right, so now the form is ready. So that's how in this workflow, basically that's how you can create a Google form using an AI agent. So now the question is, how do we capture the responses of this form and store them into the spreadsheet we created, which is the Movie Night survey spreadsheet? So how do we do that? Actually, from using the API, we don't have a direct way of connecting our form to our spreadsheet. So what we are going to do is either we do it manually or we do it a different way. So in order to do it manually, if you go to the form, you go to responses, you have an option to link to sheets here, and you can select the sheet you have created. So that's the first way. So for example, here you select an existing spreadsheet, and then when you move on, then you can select the spreadsheet that you have created previously in the workflow. However, I don't want to do that because we are relying on this agent in order to connect to the form, to create the form, and then we want a way in order to capture the responses and then put them into the spreadsheet automatically. So I'm going to show you a different way of doing that. Right. So what we are going to do is, let's say we are going to disable all of these. Okay, great. We still have the form ID and spreadsheet ID, which is great. So I'm going to show you a way in order to capture that. So what we're going to do is we need to capture the responses from the form and then store them into the spreadsheet. And then it also can be done by another workflow. For example, you send a message or you send a request to a different agent that says, hey, analyze the responses from my form, and it should basically pass information to this flow. So I'm just going to show you how you can do it here. Right, so we have a convenience node, which is form and spreadsheet info, and what do we have in here? We're going to manually store the form ID, spreadsheet ID, which has been created in this workflow. So we're going to do it manually here, but actually in your use case, you should store your spreadsheet ID and then the form ID somewhere, either in a database or in a sheet, in order to keep track of these IDs because they are very important. So let's see here. First of all, I need to have my spreadsheet ID. So I'm going to copy this text from a spreadsheet ID. I'm going to paste them here. So we have the spreadsheet ID and we have the form ID, which has been created here. So I'm going to copy this form ID and I'm going to put them here. Okay, And then we need to keep track of the form fields as well, because we're gonna need the form fields in order to capture the responses correctly into the correct columns, because we need to know how many questions we have in order to create the columns in our spreadsheet. I'm going to copy this object, copy selection, and I'm going to copy that request object. I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go up here, and then I'm going to replace this entire info that was from my previous node. So I'm going to copy the entire info here. So this is our request object. Right. Okay, so now we have captured our information here, but in your case, you should capture the information in either a database or somewhere else, or you can process the data directly after the agent has created the questions. Okay, so now what we are going to do next is we're going to capture responses from our form. So if we're going to send an HTTP request, and what do we have in this HTTP request? So basically, we're going to send a request to this endpoint, forms responses. And where do we find the information for this endpoint? We're going to find it here. If you go to the documentation again, we have forms responses, and we go to list. And as you can see here, this is the GET request with the form ID and responses. So we're going to send the exact URL and replacing it with our form ID. Okay, and it's going to be a GET request. So let's connect to here, and let's execute the workflow. And as you can see here, now we have set the information here correctly. And then we have the responses from the form. We haven't had the responses from this form yet because we've just created it, right? So let's create some fake responses so we can see. So if you go to create form node, and you can see here we have the response URI, which you can copy. And I'm going to use a private window. To go here, I'm going to paste in my window, my window browser, and then we have the form. Let's say we click next. What's your name? KP. And how many people? Let's say 2. Click next. And what's your preferred genre? So let's say I'm a fan of action and horror. Nope, I'm going to keep this blank because it's not mandatory. Which days are you available? Let's say I'm available for all days. And would you like to rate over experience in previous movie nights? So let's say I was very happy, assumingly. Right, so I'm going to submit this form. Great, now I have submitted my form, and let's go back to our workflow. And let's execute the workflow again and see if we have the responses. Okay, now as you can see, we have one response, and it's from KP. Right, so we're going to need to put all these responses into our spreadsheet. So, and how do we do that? We're going to use some code in order to process the responses and process the spreadsheet. Because in order to insert into a spreadsheet, as you can see here, we need to tell the API where to insert in the spreadsheet, where do we start inserting, and how do we insert into a spreadsheet. I will use this code node, which I created previously, and it's a long code, but I will make it available. And no, I didn't write the code myself. I used Claude, to write the code for me. So the information I asked Claude was, I have the responses from the Google Forms API, and I want to add all the responses into my spreadsheet, and then I have the Google Forms batch updates, create items available. So you need to process them, make the questions as the columns of the spreadsheet, and insert all the responses correspondingly. So I'm going to make this code available to you as well, just in case. Just copy and paste the whole thing in, but please be aware of this information because I used the node's name that I set here. So if you have changed the node's name, then you have to change this information accordingly as well. So we have the code. So let's execute this code to see what happens. So after executing the code, as you can see, we have something like this. We have the spreadsheet ID and we have the titles here, or the columns, and that is going to be the header of our form. And these are the questions we had, together with the timestamp and response ID, which we can capture from the responses. And these are our questions. Right. And then this is the very first response we had. And the range is important because it tells Google Sheets API where do you insert the data, where do you insert the header, where do you insert the data row, and so on. If you have multiple rows, then this piece of code will calculate that as well. All right, so we have the information ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through, because we have a list of items. So we're going to loop through the item. I loop through the item, and I'm going to delete this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use HTTP request again, the node. And what do we have in this HTTP request? We are going to send a request to Google Sheets API, this Google Sheets API, together with our sheet ID and the values which are the data type, the data row, right? And the range here, as you noticed in the previous codes, in each value, in each row, we have the range here. So this tells the Google Sheets API which sheet is going to insert the data. So it's default to sheet 1, and then which cell is going to start insert the data to. So we can start from A1 to K1, okay? And then that is for the header. Whereas for our very first data row, we're going to start from sheet 1 at A2, K2. And depending on the number of data rows we have, this number increases. Okay, right. And we're going to send this to our Google Sheets API. And we have a few other options here in the body of the request. So we have toggle send body, and we need to tell Google Sheets the dimension to which the data will be inserted. So we're going to use major dimension as the body parameters, and it's going to be rows because it has been defined here, major dimension in each of our data rows. Right, and then we are going to insert the values, and the values has been computed in this piece of code. So it's basically a two-dimension array. As you can see here, the values is a two-dimension array. Right, so I have a loop through the item, and then for each item I send a put request to this URL, sending the values to be inserted, and then I'm going to drag this one and then connect to the loop again, which means we're going to loop through all the items one by one, calling this API. Right, so now let's see, in our sheet it's empty, right, because we don't have anything here. And let's run our workflow again, execute workflow. And as you can see here, we have the first row, which is the title, which is the header of the form, the sheet. And then the next one is our response, the very first response. Right, so this workflow, we have two workflows here. So we have first workflow, which is used to create a Google form by just inputting a prompt, and the agent will basically create the output as a JSON object that can be used with Google Forms API to create a form in your Google Drive. And then the second workflow, we get all responses in our form, put them into our spreadsheet, and ready for further analysis. And that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you find this video helpful. And if you do like the video, please give us a subscribe. Thank you very much.